My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 72 years old. 18 years ago I walked into this building for the first time with a bucket, a rag, and my small metal lunchbox, the same one, with the dent in the lid, that I still carry every evening. Back then I thought it was just a job. A way to support myself after I was left alone. I had no idea that one day I would meet, in these very halls, the boy I had once carried in my arms while choking on smoke. But let me start from the beginning, because my story isn't about luck or coincidence. It's about the fact that some things come back to us even after we've stopped waiting for them. I always arrive at the office after 7, when almost everyone has gone home. I love that hour, the quiet, the dimmed lights, the hum of the air conditioning instead of voices. I push my cart down corridors where, during the day, other people's lives race by too quickly, and I think my own thoughts. People walk past me as though I were a piece of furniture. I don't take offense. I understood long ago that being invisible isn't a humiliation, it's a kind of freedom. No one asks unnecessary questions. No one demands explanations. On my cart there is always one photograph, black and white, worn at the corners, tucked beneath a stack of clean rags. I carry it with me every single day, though it might seem pointless to haul an old picture from shift to shift. It simply makes me calmer. As if, as long as it's near me, a part of my old life still exists. That evening I was dusting, as usual, in the corner office on the top floor, the one where old Mr. Carter used to sit, and where his son now works. Young. Strict. Everyone in the office whispers that the new CEO is cold as metal and so demanding that a single glance from him can strike people speechless. I had barely seen him, he was either traveling or staying late, locked away with mountains of paperwork. That evening he, too, had stayed late. I caught sight of him out of the corner of my eye as I passed with my cart. He stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, as if searching them for the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask himself. I needed to change the water in my bucket. I stepped out for a minute, leaving the cart by his office door. That must have been when the photograph slipped free. I didn't notice right away. When I came back, I saw him holding it in his hands, his face changed, as though he'd seen a ghost. I know what's written on it. I wrote those words myself, 30 years ago, with fingers trembling from emotion, in a hospital room that smelled of iodine and burned skin, my own. To my brave little Danny. Never stop smiling. Margaret, summer 1996. I watched him read those words over and over, as if he couldn't quite believe his own eyes. His hands shook slightly. "Where did you get this?" he asked, and his voice sounded nothing like the cold tone people described. There was confusion in it. Almost childlike. I couldn't answer him. Not then. For too many years I had kept that silence, too carefully built the wall between the woman who had once been a school nurse and the one who now mopped floors in his father's company every evening. I told him I didn't know what he meant. That I was seeing him for the first time. I asked for the photograph back, as if it were nothing more than something someone had left behind on my cart by accident. He handed it back to me. But his gaze stayed the same, the look of a man who understood there was something behind it, and who would not rest until he found out what. That night, once I got home, I sat for a long time at my kitchen table with my tea, looking at that same photograph. At a boy of about 10, with tousled hair and eyes full of fear, he was trying, with everything he had, to hide behind a smile. I remembered that smile. I had begged it out of him myself, in the smoke, amid the roar of falling beams, when I said, "Smile for me, Danny, until we get out of here. Promise me you'll smile." He had smiled then. Frightened, crooked, but a smile. And I carried him out in my arms. In 1996 I worked as a school nurse. I was just past 40, full of energy and my own hopes, for a husband, a home, a future that seemed entirely ordinary and entirely secure. The fire started suddenly, around midday. Wiring shorted out in the basement, and the flames, like a starving animal, tore up the stairwells faster than anyone could react. Children were screaming. Teachers tried to lead their classes out, but in the panic no one noticed that one boy had been left behind, little Daniel Carter, curled into a corner of the second-floor library, paralyzed with terror. I didn't think, not for a second. I simply ran. Through smoke, through heat that scorched my lungs before it ever touched my skin. I found him under a table, curled into a ball, and I remember how he gripped my arm so hard it left bruises. We barely made it out. A beam collapsed just beside us, sparks burned through my sleeve, then my shoulder. The pain came later. In that moment there was only one thing: get him to the door, to the air, to the light. I was carried out on a stretcher along with him. The burns were severe, second and, in places, third degree, across my left shoulder and part of my back. I spent nearly 3 months in the hospital. After that my hands never quite obeyed the way they used to, and my old work, with its rushing about, its shifts, its overnight duties, had to be given up. I never once regretted that day. Not for a moment. But I decided one thing for myself: I did not want to be remembered as a hero. I hadn't saved a future billionaire, the heir to a great company. I had saved a frightened child who simply wanted someone to tell him everything would be all right. That was all I needed. His family offered money. Compensation, gratitude, newspaper interviews. I turned all of it down. I kept only the photograph, the single picture that had been taken before they rushed me to the hospital, me, burned, my arm hastily bandaged, standing beside him, still trembling but already trying to smile at my request. I wrote those words on the back and tucked the photo away so carefully that even I sometimes forgot I had it. But not that evening. That evening it always lay beside me. The day after that incident in his office, I was called upstairs again. I walked down the hallway with my heart pounding, ready for anything: dismissal, questions, whatever consequences might follow from that photograph ever having caught his eye. But he was simply sitting at his desk, silent, a folder of old newspaper clippings in front of him. I recognized the headlines before he even said a word. A fire at a school. 1996, a boy rescued. The name of the woman who had carried him out was never mentioned in the articles. I had asked the reporters myself not to include it. I went through the whole family archive, he said quietly. I asked my mother. She changes the subject every time I bring it up. But someone else told me more. I said nothing. I just stood by the door, gripping my lunchbox as though it could shield me. Our old driver, he went on. James. He recognized you in the hallway a month ago, but he stayed quiet because you never brought it up yourself. Yesterday, when I asked him directly, he told me something I can't forget. He looked at me as though waiting for me to finish the sentence for him. But I stayed silent. He said, "Your father spent his whole life trying to find her." That evening I learned something that overturned a part of me that was very old and very quiet. It turned out that all this time, all these years while I mopped floors in a company named after a man whose life I had once tried to remember only as a distant episode, Daniel's father had been searching for me. Searching for a nameless woman who had once walked into a burning building and walked back out of it, carrying his son. He couldn't find me directly. I had changed my last name after my divorce, moved to another part of the city, left medicine behind for good. But he never gave up. Years later, still unable to track me down in person, he founded a charitable organization and named it after me. The Margaret Hope Foundation. I had heard that name before, somewhere in the news, on a banner at a charity dinner written up in the local paper. But I had never connected it to myself. There are plenty of Margarets in the world. Plenty of foundations with pretty words in their names. Daniel told me that for years his father had anonymously donated money there, funding programs for burn survivors, supporting the training of medical staff in burn units. All of it in memory of a woman whose name he knew but whose face had long faded from his memory, leaving only a gratitude he never managed to express in person. I sat across from Daniel in his office and felt my hands shaking, not from pain, but from that strange, heavy feeling when a past you believed was a closed chapter suddenly opens again right in front of you, and it turns out it had been living its own life somewhere off to the side the whole time. "Why did you never say anything?" he asked then. There was no accusation in his voice, no reproach, only genuine, almost childlike bewilderment. I was quiet for a long time before answering. "Because I wasn't saving a future billionaire," I said finally. "I was saving a frightened child. And I never wanted gratitude for it. Gratitude turns an act into a transaction. I wanted it to remain simply what it was, a moment when one person reached out a hand to another." He looked at me for a long time after that. Then he nodded, as though something in him had finally settled into place. A week later, all the cleaning staff were gathered in the main lobby. Rumors spread instantly. Everyone was certain layoffs were coming. I saw the worry on the faces of my colleagues, the same women who, every evening like me, push their carts down these endless corridors, invisible to most of the people who work here by day. I stood among them, in my work uniform, my familiar lunchbox in hand, feeling a strange calm, the same calm that always comes over me when I stop fearing whatever is about to happen. Daniel came out to us differently than one comes out to announce layoffs. He stood before everyone, a little more unsettled than I was used to seeing him, and didn't speak right away, as though choosing words he didn't want to ruin with the wrong tone. "There is a person," he said at last, "because of whom I might not even be here today." The room fell silent. People exchanged glances, not understanding where he was heading. I felt my breath catch even before he said my name. "Margaret," he said, looking straight at me. "Would you come up here, please?" I remember walking across the whole room, feeling dozens of eyes on me, for the first time in 18 years feeling not like a shadow in a hallway but like a person who was truly seen. My legs shook more than they had the day I walked out of that burning building. He waited for me on the platform. And when I reached him, he did something I never expected from a man everyone in this building called cold and unapproachable. He hugged me. Tightly, wordlessly, the way you hug someone you have searched for a long time and finally found. Then, stepping back, he turned to the room and said words I will remember for the rest of my life. "For 18 years you cleaned the floors in a company that exists because you once saved the little boy who would grow up to lead it." The silence in the room became absolute. I saw tears well up in the eyes of some of my colleagues. They, too, like me, had spent years unseen, years growing used to having their work noticed only when something went wrong. Then the applause started. Quiet and hesitant at first, then louder and louder. The entire room stood and applauded a woman who, until yesterday, had been for most of them simply a cleaner pushing a cart past them at the end of a hallway. Now I no longer mop floors in that company. Daniel insisted that I accept his help, not as charity, he said, but as something that should have been mine long ago. I didn't agree right away. It took me time to allow myself to accept what I had refused for so many years. But every Friday I still come to that building, no longer with a rag and bucket, but simply to have tea with the people I worked alongside for nearly 2 decades. We sit in the same break room where I used to clean up after everyone left, and now I sit there as a guest, not as a shadow. In the main lobby, where once there hung only corporate logos and abstract paintings, there is now my photograph, the same black and white photograph, its edge scorched, that I carried in my lunchbox for 18 years. Beneath it, a single line, "Some heroes never ask to be remembered." I look at that line every Friday as I walk past, and I think that life is sometimes arranged far more justly than it seems in its darkest moments. Not because good deeds are always rewarded, I don't quite believe that. But because sometimes, many years later, it simply comes back to you on its own, quietly, without warning, in the shape of the eyes of a boy you once held in your arms, now grown into a man standing before an entire room and saying your name out loud. I did not save the future CEO of a large technology company. I saved a frightened child named Danny, who asked for nothing more than someone to stay beside him. And in the end, I think, that turned out to matter more than everything else. Sometimes in the evenings, when the house is quiet and the kettle has long gone cold, I still take out my old metal lunchbox, the same one, with the dent in the lid, just to hold it in my hands. I don't need it for work anymore, but I can't part with it. It holds too many years, too many evenings when I pushed my cart down empty corridors, certain my story would remain forever unknown. I often think that if the photograph hadn't slipped off that desk, if Daniel hadn't picked it up in that exact second, I probably would have worked at that company until retirement without ever saying a word. And honestly, I wouldn't have minded. Not because the silence weighed on me, but because I never truly needed to be recognized. But now that everything has come out into the open, I see another side of this story, one I hadn't noticed before. The younger cleaning staff I once shared shifts with have started looking at their own work differently. Not as something invisible and unimportant, but as labor behind which stands a person, with a history, a past, reasons for being exactly here, exactly now. One of the young women told me over tea that after that day in the lobby, she felt, for the first time in a long while, that she was truly seen. Maybe that is the real meaning of what happened to me. Not the embrace in front of the whole room, not the photograph on the wall, not even the foundation carrying my name. But the fact that somewhere in those corridors, a few less people now walk past each other without looking. Daniel still stops by for tea on Fridays sometimes, sits across from me, as composed as ever, the way the company knows him, but with the eyes of that same boy I once asked to smile. We rarely talk about the fire. Usually we just sit quietly together, and it's a different kind of silence than before, warm, calm, needing no explanation. I have lived a long life, full of ordinary, quiet days. And if anyone ever asks what I'm proudest of, I won't talk about the rescue, or the foundation, or the applause in the lobby. I'll say that I'm proud that all those years, even while remaining invisible, I never stopped being myself.